It looks like we're getting a critical mass here, so thanks all for joining this afternoon. We're very excited to welcome you all to today's webinar on agrivoltaics, the benefits and potential of dual-use solar on agricultural lands. So for today's session, which will be a Zoom webinar format, we'll have all the attendees on mute, but encourage folks to drop any questions, comments into the chat feature or the Q&A button. And we'll be capping off our event today with a Q&A session where we'll address some of those audience questions. But today's session will discuss the benefits of agrivoltaics for avoiding disruptive land use, helping productive agricultural land remain operational while preserving the natural environment, and allowing farmers and ranchers to diversify their income. We want to give a big thank you to the U.S. Department of Energy Office of State and Community Energy Programs for their support of the NASEO Rural Energy Working Group and also today's event. This presentation will feature a panel of experts on agrivoltaics and solar programs that will hopefully also help states and all of our other attendees on the line better understand the technology and what role agrivoltaics can play for their agricultural communities. So without further ado, Kelsey, if we can advance the slide. We'll first be hearing from Jordan Machnick, the lead energy, water, land analyst for the National Renewable Energy Laboratory, or NREL. And his presentation will be followed by Grace Fletchers, a program coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, then followed by Samantha Levy, Conservation and Climate Policy Manager at the American Farmland Trust. Note that we are recording today's session and we'll be glad to circulate slides following. So without further ado, we'll pass things over to Jordan to share his screen for slides. So there'll be a quick transition here.
All right, thanks so much. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jordan Machnick. I'm with the National Renewable Energy Laboratory out in Golden, Colorado, and I'll be giving a little bit of an overview on some basics of agrivoltaics, what we're seeing sort of around the country, some initial lessons learned. So hopefully setting the stage for Grace and Samantha and our discussion later on. So when we think about why are we having this webinar? What is agrivoltaics? Why is everyone joining this? It's really, I think a confluence of a few different trends. One, we're all aware, the lower costs of solar, state, other policies are really driving deployment. We're seeing a rapid expansion of utility scale solar, and this will require land use, all across the country. Meanwhile, we have sort of an aging farming population. Farms make, ideal spots for solar projects for a number of different reasons. Farmers can benefit, greatly from hosting solar projects. But that leads to a lot of public opposition and pushback against solar development happening in rural areas or taking, prime agricultural land out of production, a lot of other relevant challenges. And so we're seeing agrivoltaics emerging as a solution and really having some demonstrated value in addressing some of these concerns that can, help farmers with more economic resilience. It can help solar developers find access to land and hopefully avoid some of these land use conflicts that we're seeing. So again, our sort of vision is that, solar projects can be developed that do provide multiple benefits to the land as well as to our agricultural communities. And when we define agrivoltaics, sort of in a big picture, we think about it's some sort of agriculture or beneficial land management directly underneath and in between the solar panels in the array. And so it's important that the land that you're working is directly impacting and associated with the solar panel infrastructure itself. So that's sort of our definition. And we really take it at NREL, we take a very much a big umbrella approach. And involve a lot of different activities within agrivoltaics. And so this includes crop production. So growing, tomatoes or peppers or wheat, underneath or in between rows of panels. Grazing, often that involves sheep, but we are seeing a few different ideas and novel technologies compatible with cattle, also chickens, other animals are possible. Pollinator habitat is another area, or sometimes it's called ecovoltaics. This is sometimes included, sometimes excluded from different people's definitions, but it can provide benefits to the soil and surrounding farms, and then also solar greenhouses. And so when we talk about agrivoltaics in the broadest sense, this is really what we're referring to, these sorts of categories. And I'll go into depth on each of these in a little bit more detail, but this is just high level what we're seeing. The one thing that's important to note is that agrivoltaics can look very different depending on where you are, depending on what your local farms are doing, what your local activities might be. And so on the top row, we see sort of traditional utility scale configuration. So we're not really elevating the height, doing anything different, but you can grow crops in between rows, you can have sheep graze underneath, or you can grow pollinator habitat underneath and in between the panels. On the bottom row, though, we see that there are opportunities for altering the configuration. Most of these really result in higher compatibility for agricultural activities. So that would be, elevating panels or spreading panels apart or spreading rows apart, or having a novel tracking or, algorithms that really affect where the sun is pointing and when the system is producing energy versus when it's providing shade for the plants. As you might expect, sort of all these sort of necessarily come with a little bit of a cost increase over your traditional utility scale designs. But again, the benefit is that they allow for additional agricultural activities to occur. Through our work at NREL, we lead the Inspire project. So this is a project. It's the Department of Energy's flagship agrivoltaics research effort. We've been operating since 2015, exploring all different aspects of agrivoltaics, including field work and demonstrations. So we currently operate 24 field research sites all across the country, looking at different configurations, different crops, different management techniques, and trying to best understand really what grows well underneath the panels, and what are the sort of implications on costs or reliability or any other factors like that. You can see the map that highlights the location of our different spots that are all across the country. But these 24 sites are really just sort of a subset of what's happening nationwide. And so we, as part of our Inspire project, we also track agrivoltaic deployment locations all across the country. And so we're currently seeing over 400 different agrivoltaic sites, representing more than 6 gigawatts of capacity across 43,000 acres. So many of our larger sites are actually grazing sites. So we're seeing, especially in the South, in Texas or in California, very large grazing sites. But then we're still sort of under 50 total projects related that are crop production. But those are rapidly expanding, and as we've seen from different state efforts and initiatives, those are only going to be increasing in the future as well. But I think bottom line is, even though this is a relatively new field, it's already been demonstrated. People have been exploring, people have been identifying really what works or doesn't in their particular areas for many years now. All right, and as sort of as a brief overview of how we think about agrivoltaics. So for crop production, most commonly for crop production, we are seeing increases in panel heights or panel rows, to accommodate tractors, accommodate people, accommodate plants that might grow tall enough where they could potentially shade activities. And so this could, always, potentially have impact not only on your capital investment, but also in your O&M needs. But again, we have seen this is really, when people think about agrivoltaics, it's, that's really one of the first things they think about is, growing tomatoes underneath the panels. And so we haven't, can share some examples from our research. So we're doing research on agrivoltaics at University of Arizona Biosphere 2 site. So here we saw a cooler microclimate led to 2% more generation. We saw a tripling of yields for some peppers, a doubling of yields for some for tomatoes, all while using 30% less water for tomatoes and 50% less water for peppers. That was in Arizona. When we go to a more temperate climate like Massachusetts, we might see some very different results. And so here, really the placement, here we're looking at broccoli on the right, but depending on where you place that broccoli, you could get broccoli crowns, the size of your head, or broccoli crowns the size of your fist. And so it's really, again, something that we're learning how to do it. Farmers are learning how to adapt to these different shaded conditions to really try to see what the outcomes could be. And so there's always, room for improvement in our agricultural practices, but that's something that, really remains to a future area of work as well, is really optimizing agricultural activities underneath the panels. When we think about agrivoltaics and pollinator-friendly solar, you really don't need to modify your design much at all. You can, you will have to get a specialized seed mix and probably have some specialized management practices for the first couple of years. But then theoretically, you could potentially have lower O&M costs in the long term for having to mow it less frequently than things like turf grass. Here's some examples of our research showing changes over the course of 5 years in not only flowers and beneficial habitat, but then also the insect species themselves. We also have the opportunity to benefit local farms through pollination services, and it can also support honey production, apiaries, which can be a nice rural economic benefit as well. On the grazing side, as I mentioned, most traditionally we see sheep in the United States, and that's partly because, again, you really don't have to do much modification to the system design. Sheep can go around lower panels. You would need to think about some fencing as well as water access. But when we start talking about cattle, then we start thinking about elevating panels or having some other sort of design to accommodate panels to ensure the safety of the equipment as well as the animals. We have seen some preliminary data showing increases in soil quality due to grazing underneath panels as well. And then lastly, we have solar greenhouses. And so these, I think there's multiple different designs and technologies and materials you can use on top of a greenhouse that can affect sunlight or transform the wavelengths that are supporting the crop growth underneath. There's some really promising technologies emerging. Much more has been deployed in Europe and in Asia than in the United States on greenhouses, but there's certainly opportunities here. I mentioned some of the cost increases. We're documenting what those cost increases could be for different designs. And lastly, I'll just highlight some work that we've done as sort of a culmination of the last 5 or 6 years of our Inspire work, a paper called The 5 C's of Agrivoltaic Success. In this, we sort of highlight what are the different elements that go into determining whether an agrivoltaics project could be successful or not in the long term. The first C is climate, so our sunlight, soil conditions. The second is our configuration, which affects how much sunlight is getting through in our microclimate. The third is which crops you select and how you decide to grow them. And then the last, and those first 3 really focus on physically what can grow. But our last 2 C's, compatibility and collaboration, really, I think, affect who else is involved in the project. Will a farmer, be able to or want to farm this, as well as sort of what long-term agreements do you have in place among multiple partners to really ensure a long-term, long-standing success with these projects. So with that, I just gave you a very broad overview of certain agrivoltaic topics, concepts. Hopefully it lays a foundation for Grace and Samantha to really dive a little bit deeper into some of these issues. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the discussion afterwards.
Great. Thanks so much, Jordan. And it's kind of a tough task distilling all that you know on the topic into that 10 minutes, but really appreciate the overview. All right, we'll pass things over now to Grace, and your slides should be up.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. My My name is Grace Fletcher. I am a program coordinator at the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources, and I help implement our state's solar incentive program, which is called SMART, and Agrivoltaics have a role in that program. And thank you to NASEO for having me today. Next slide. So very briefly, just wanted to give a quick overview of the SMART program and kind of how it's structured for those who might not be familiar. So this is our primary solar incentive program in our state right now, and it's a declining incentive program that is run in coordination with the utility companies, and they compensate the owner of solar systems for each kilowatt hour that's generated. And SMART places a big emphasis on land use and incentivizing different types of land use over others. So we do that through adders to the compensation rates. And I've listed just a few here that receive elevated adders under the program. So of course, building mounted canopies and brownfields, and then agrivoltaics as well. Next slide. And I won't spend too much time here since it's just a lot of numbers, but basically just to give some context, at least in Massachusetts specifically, I wanted to provide some numbers on the relative costs of these different system types that we're trying to incentivize and the level of incentive that they currently receive under our program, with the caveat that this data is just representative of systems that are participating in the SMART program and are currently operational. So it's definitely a smaller subset, but just to give some context. And you can see that agrivoltaic systems tend to be on the higher end. That's partially because of the more complex design that they require. And for that reason, we have them receive the 6-cent adder to their base compensation rate, which is one of our highest adders. And that's also to compensate for the fact that these projects require a lot more coordination on the part of the developer as well, working hand in hand with the farmer and the landowner to make sure that the mutual goals are being met. Next slide. And just a couple of program statistics, also to kind of give some perspective on where we are in Massachusetts. So this idea has definitely been growing in popularity in the past few years, but that being said, it's still a very, very small percentage of our program at this time. So the SMART program is a 3,200 megawatt program, and the current stated goal is to have 80 megawatts of agrivoltaics. Currently, we only have 3 projects that are actually fully operating in the state, and then we've got about 17 more that are kind of in the pipeline and are going through the process now. So those only account for about 30 megawatts and less than 2% of our total program capacity. And then just to list a few of the existing project types that we've seen so far, a lot of the same ones that Jordan mentioned, livestock grazing and hay have definitely been very popular for us here so far, as well as traditional vegetable production and cranberries as well, because we have a lot of cranberry bogs in Massachusetts. Next slide. And then definitely wanted to touch on our collaboration with our Department of Agricultural Resources, MDAR. So they are our sister agency and definitely have played and continue to play a very key role in the implementation of this component of our program. And for any state agencies out there that are thinking about getting their own process off the ground, this is a really key part of it. So we rely heavily on their expertise on the agricultural side, while they lean on our expertise with the energy side. So a few years ago, when the program was first being developed, there was a lot of collaboration with them in the development of our guideline, which really lays out all of the specifics for the developers on the eligibility criteria and the system design parameters and what the different requirements are that they need to meet to receive this adder, as well as developing the application that developers submit to us to get a predetermination saying that they will be eligible to receive this adder. And now, as the program has become established, we jointly review every project proposal with MDAR. So when they submit their predetermination, MDAR will often go and do a site visit in person with the farmer and the developer, which I think is very valuable for them to be able to see on the ground what's going on and what's being proposed. And then any stakeholder engagement with the agricultural or solar community, we definitely do in conjunction with them. And then, of course, the knowledge sharing that I mentioned. Next slide. So also wanted to give a quick overview of what our review process looks like from start to finish for these projects. Hopefully helpful for any office that's thinking about establishing their own process. So another entity that we have a close partnership with is our UMass Clean Energy Extension. And they really come in at the beginning of the process before developers ever come to our agencies for review. And the Clean Energy Extension will work with the developer and the farmer to tweak their plans and advise them on how to improve their predetermination application to make sure they're meeting all the program requirements, so that when it comes over to us, it's hopefully in the best shape it can be, and it kind of reduces some of the back and forth. So that's very helpful for us. And then once they have received those comments from UMass, they'll submit their full application to us for our joint review. And we issue a predetermination letter to the applicant, which is only a conditional approval, because this is before the project has been constructed. So it basically says that as proposed, the project meets the criteria, but that can always, their eligibility can always be rescinded later on if things change. And at that point, usually the developer submits their full application to the SMART program with their interconnection agreement and all their other paperwork, and the whole construction process begins. And then once they receive permission to operate and they're interconnected, that 20-year incentive term begins, and that's when the developer actually starts receiving the incentive and that 6-cent adder that I mentioned. Afterwards, since this is a 20-year incentive term, we have an annual reporting system for these types of projects to make sure that they are continuing to meet the criteria and that the project is truly meeting the agricultural intention and both goals of it. So each year, the project owner, in conjunction with the farmer, will submit an annual report to our agencies to show the crop yields, how the agricultural operation is going, and if the project is, meeting the goals that it was intended to meet. So at this point in time, we've only collected, I think, one batch of those annual reports, because as I said, we only have 3 projects that have started operating. So that's pretty new for us, but we're looking forward in the coming years to continue collecting those each year, and it should provide some valuable insights. Next slide. Just a few of our regulatory requirements that I wanted to highlight, because these are really key for making sure that these systems are implemented in a way that really does balance the priorities between the energy production and the agricultural production. And these are written into our SMART regulations. So for the developer to receive the incentive, it's contingent on them staying in compliance with these requirements. So there's definitely the motivation there for them to want to continue to meet these over the course of the 20-year term. So a lot of what I've already raised, but making sure that the system doesn't interfere with the agricultural operation, balancing the electricity generation and agricultural productivity. And then right now in our program, we do require the systems to be a raised structure. We have some minimum height requirements for the panels to make sure that the crops and machinery and people can operate underneath the panels. Next slide. And then just a few of the elements of what these applications actually look like and what we ask for from the developers when they first come to us with a proposal. I mentioned the collaboration with the Clean Energy Extension. So they will provide a formal comment letter to each developer, and they will then pass that along to us for review in their application. We get a map of the property and the farm, what the plan is for the solar array design, the site plan, and then each project is also required to do a shading analysis, which we provide a software for them to do that. And we have maximum shading requirements, which I believe is 50%. So they have to show in advance what the plan is for meeting that maximum shading requirement. And then we see the actual farm plan itself, what the farmer's intentions are for growing underneath the panels, or if they're going to do grazing. And then the different regulatory requirements are also listed out in the application, and the developer will demonstrate how they intend to comply with those requirements. Next slide. Wrapping up, just want to highlight a few of the challenges and opportunities that we have seen so far in the very early stages of our program. On the challenges side, what I've already mentioned with just balancing the solar production with the agriculture and making sure that we're implementing these projects in a way that truly does meet the goals of all parties involved, and that one priority doesn't take precedence over another. And for that, we really need ongoing research and more data. So those annual reports that I mentioned will be really helpful for us to inform any future changes we might need to make to the program to make sure that we are continuing to hit those goals. And then the extended interconnection timelines, I'm sure you all know that that's not a unique issue to agrivoltaics, but it can pose some unique challenges for them considering all of the parties that are involved in these projects. And there's a lot of other considerations that go into it with taking the farm operation into consideration. So when the timeline for development and interconnection is ambiguous or very delayed, that can definitely pose some challenges. But on the positive side, there's the possibility of the additional revenue stream for farmers, which can be really crucial for their operation. And it could even result in keeping the land in agriculture when it may not have been otherwise. And then for our land use goals in general in the state, this is an opportunity to divert solar development from other places where we don't want it, like forests and open space. So a lot of possibilities, but still more to learn. And then I think I have one more slide. Yep, so just a couple things looking ahead for us here in Massachusetts, things that we're looking forward to. We recently this summer released a technical potential of solar study, which is an online mapping tool that anybody is able to go and check out. It is a parcel by parcel analysis of the total technical potential for solar, and it looks at different suitability criteria to see where would be the most suitable places to site solar. And we're really excited about this as a tool, not only for solar developers to use, but also for cities and towns and us as policymakers when we're deciding how to move forward with our solar programs, and for utilities as well, so that we can all plan the best future for solar siting. We also have a commission on agrivoltaics that is currently being developed. This was established by the legislature, and it's going to have representatives from the agricultural, solar community, environmental community, as well as some state agencies. And they are going to look at a lot of research and data around agrivoltaics and provide some recommendations for future regulatory changes, which is exciting. And then within our own program under SMART, we've got ongoing data gathering and research through those annual reports and our collaboration with UMass and some of the research that they're doing in coordination with developers. So definitely more to come, but that is the overview of where we are now. And thank you for listening.
Great. So I guess that leaves me. Thank you, Jordan and Grace, for some excellent presentations to set the topic. And thank you for having me. It's really nice to be with everybody today. My name is Samantha Levy. I'm American Farmland Trust's Conservation and Climate Policy Manager. I lead on our conservation practice policy and climate policy on our federal team, and also work to support our state and regional policy managers and solar specialists, including on solar. So AFT's mission, for folks who may not know who we are, is to save the land that sustains us. And we do that in three primary ways: by working to keep farmers on the land, promote sound farming practices, and by protecting farmland, keeping land in farming. And all of these areas of our mission are married by a focus on farm viability, economic viability, as Grace mentioned. And we often say we work from the kitchen table to Congress. So we work one-on-one with farmers at the kitchen table in the field, and then we also work on policy. And we've got a pretty substantial solar team across the country in our regional offices, the national level. So lots of folks to tap into. My focus is on policy, and so that's going to be the focus of my presentation. Next slide, please. So before I get into the policy area here, I'm going to try to drop into the chat, a link to a report that AFT did to sort of ground what I'm going to talk about, called our Farms Under Threat report. We've had 3 iterations of this. This comes from our State of the States report back in 2019, where we looked at farmland conversion to residential development, highly dense and low density residential development. And here you can see a map of the United States with the red areas showing conversion between 2001 and 2016. And we found 11 million acres were converted to non-agricultural uses in that time period. And another thing that came out of this study was an evaluation of farmland quality, farm and ranchland quality. So you can see the darker green are the most productive, versatile, and resilient farmland that we mapped across the country. And then same thing goes for rangeland in the darker yellow. And that's a really important key thing to keep in mind, that farmland quality really does differ really from acre to acre, plot to plot, and farm to farm. That's super important in this conversation. Next slide, please. And now, as we've talked about, as you all know, a new form of development is taking place and will continue to accelerate with the implementation of IRA funding and state policy, and just, the lowered cost of solar. Many of you are probably familiar with the Department of Energy Solar Futures study that looked at the sort of land use needs to decarbonize our grid. A little over 10 million acres by 2050 was what they projected, with 90% of that expected to occur in rural areas. So oftentimes folks will say, well, that's a really small slice of the total farmland that we have across the country, or the total land that we have across the country. But we all know that as projects, trend towards the utility scale, the development of projects will be concentrated in areas with good siting and interconnection characteristics. Next slide, please. So AFT also undertook some predictive modeling of solar development as part of our Farms Under Threat research. And we found that based on past development patterns and current policies, 83% of future solar development was expected to take place on farmland, with nearly half on our most productive, versatile, and resilient land. And I don't need to tell you, I'm sure all of you are experiencing that in your states. We know developers tend to favor the lower cost, flat, open, clear, sunny, near energy infrastructure. It's beneficial to be developing at a lower cost, obviously, because it keeps energy costs low. But this also overlaps pretty strongly with our high quality farmland. And we predicted that about half of that 83% was on our most productive, versatile, and resilient land, or our nationally significant farmland. But as Jordan said, this isn't all a story of concern. Farmer landowners who secure solar leases will see steady income, they can benefit. But this has also and can displace farmer renters who can't really financially compete with the prices developers offer. And as projects trend larger, concentration in farm communities can become a concern for the viability of farms that remain. So a lot of these questions are coming up, a lot of these conflicts are coming up. You probably are well aware in your communities. And these conflicts are slowing projects, halting projects, threatening the timely achievement of US climate goals. So what's the solution to such a complex and nuanced problem from AFT's perspective with our mission? Next slide, please. So we've developed 4 smart solar principles, kind of a play off of the idea of smart growth, that we think if folks follow these, stakeholders, developers, policymakers work to achieve these, then we can achieve a build out that supports and strengthens farm viability and rural communities across America. So these 4 principles are: prioritize siting on the built environment and on marginal land. So that can be your canopies, your rooftops, your contaminated lands, some of the areas that Grace showed in the adder system, and on marginal farmland, the less productive, versatile, and resilient land, so that we can keep our most productive, versatile, and resilient land for growing food and crops. Protect the ability for farmland put into solar to be farmed in the future. This is an important one not often thought about, to make sure that soil health and productivity aren't deeply affected by construction, by decommissioning, that you retain, soil organic matter, topsoil, you don't compact the soil, you don't erode your soil. To expand agrivoltaics, which is obviously the purpose of this conversation, to keep land and farming as we transition to renewable energy, and to promote equity and farm viability in our solar build out. And I'm going to drop a link into the chat, another one to our Smart Solar website. So if folks want more information about these, this is the place to go. Next slide, please. And once again, this is all driven by our mission, with the inclusion of, we want to address climate change because this is impacting farmers, and to accelerate the development of renewable energy in ways that keep farmers on the land, promote sound farming practices, and keep land in farming. How? Well, I think through policy. So that's what I'm going to talk about. Next slide, please. So there are going to be a lot of words on these slides. I hope you'll bear with me, because I'm sort of revealing to you all something that is not yet public. So these are our draft. AFT has been, over the last year, undertaking a process to develop policy recommendations for local, state, and federal policymakers to advance our smart solar principles through policy and shape a smart solar build out. So I'm going to be sharing with you some of the ideas that we've come up with, in the hopes that it helps to generate additional feedback and discussion in addition to what Grace and Jordan shared. So first I'll start with the 3 principles, not about agrivoltaics, and then I'll go deeper into agrivoltaics. So the first is prioritize siting on the built environment and marginal farmland. Important to invest in research to see what the opportunity is, what the cost differential may be. We really like the idea of least conflict processes. There's one in Washington State and Columbia Plateau, and there was one in the San Joaquin Valley in California that brings different stakeholders together to identify the least conflict areas for solar development, and the low impact ways to develop solar, and then the areas to prioritize avoiding converting. So Grace mentioned forests. I'm sure a lot of states will share that sentiment. So high quality farmland can fall under that area as well. So these stakeholder processes give you the benefit of proactive community engagement, and sort of self-determination and direction, which we know local folks tend to really like. And then we recommend implementing incentives and disincentives to help actualize what you find from these least conflict processes. So incentives for siting in least conflict areas, disincentives like per acre compensatory mitigation fees. New York has one. A few other states are exploring them, for non-agrivoltaic solar. So solar that converts land out of production. And then you get the benefit of, if a developer needs to develop a priority area, then you get payment into a fund to help mitigate the loss. Also recommend collecting a lot of information in permitting and procurement. Grace had a lot of great examples on that. You can click next. So second, I'll go through safeguarding the ability to farm the land after the life of the array. Once again, like I said, something not a lot of states have thought about yet. Important to invest in research to determine what those adjustments to the current standards or current practices are of constructing, operating, and decommissioning an array. And then finding what those minimum standards should be when sited on farmland to protect soil health and productivity, and ensuring that developers and installers follow those. For those of you out west, where you've got water issues, making sure to bank water rights for future use, because if you extinguish water rights for the solar array, you've all but ensured that this is a permanent conversion. It's going to be hard to farm the land in the future. requiring decommissioning plans and funding, and then providing training and education to installers so they know what these standards look like. And you can click next. And then advancing farm viability and equity, investing in research on impacts, supporting distributed solar, net metering, community solar, especially in ways that advance these principles. Ensuring an adequate base of farmland remains in communities so you don't have a lot of conversion that sort of decimates the farm economy. Providing information to landowners so they're empowered to engage with solar developers and negotiate with them. And then reducing the energy burden on low and moderate income customers. So making sure that none of these policies are regressive to low income ratepayers. Next slide, please. So I'm going to drill down for the last few minutes into agrivoltaic recommendations. So as we mentioned, there are some applications that are more common. I'll start off by saying that AFT really does only consider the simultaneous production of an agricultural product and solar energy generation in an integrated way throughout the life of the project to be agrivoltaic. So while pollinator habitat or other ecosystem services are beneficial, that to us is not enough to qualify this for agrivoltaics and bestow on those projects some of the benefits that we're trying to carve out in policies to sort of advance developers into thinking and integrating more diverse types of production systems into their solar arrays. So right now, the most economically compatible really is sheep grazing, especially on a larger scale. So we need more research and demonstration to look at the other applications, get folks feeling more comfortable with them, and understanding how things may need to be shifted. As Jordan said, and as Grace mentioned, these projects can be more costly. So financial incentives are really important, especially if you're trying to get more diverse types of agrivoltaic arrays like crop production plus solar. And then making sure that you're thinking about supporting agrivoltaic farmers. So if there are programs at the state level that you're offering to producers, making sure that those that are farming within a solar array can apply. Next slide, please. So just really quickly going to drill into the second point in there, because this is important, and Grace provided a great example of how Massachusetts goes about this. But like I said, we're going to be releasing these draft recommendations, and these are some of our ideas of how we can get to this more true form of agrivoltaic production and solar projects. So agencies that implement financial incentives like adders or continuation of current use taxation or exemption from per acre mitigation fees need a strong qualification definition. So what qualifies as agrivoltaic? Need the ability to ensure the farming continues with spot checks and penalties. So that would kind of disqualify things like extra points in procurement solicitations from this kind of thinking. And we recommend prioritizing projects that support historically marginalized producers and periodically reporting on the systems that are being supported. You can click next. And a few more words on the definition. Oh, this was all supposed to come up together. Can you click again? Perfect, thank you. We think the definition should really be created by the Department of Agriculture with farm groups in consultation with energy agencies. Agrivoltaic projects need to ensure the continual production of a marketable product throughout the full life of the array. They should take into account that products traditionally grown in the community or state. And in order to qualify for an incentive, we really want to see developers at a minimum being able to demonstrate they're working with a farmer with a viable business plan, like Grace said, incorporating design changes like water wells, changes in panel spacing, height, whatever, that will enable the farm to be viable or change in response to market demands over decades, and that they're working with an installer who can implement these designs properly. Next slide. So more work to come in the future. Like I said, we'll be releasing what I just went through in final form. Next month, we're hoping to release. So happy to take questions or feedback during this discussion or later. Look out for policies in the Farm Bill. We're working on a few marker bills. Wouldn't be surprised if when we have a farm bill, there's something in there around smart solar, and we're continuing to work on state level policy. AFT can provide resources, maps of PVR land, and maybe even consultations as you work to develop policies that advance smart solar in your states, that strengthen farm communities and get projects built. So next slide, please. Please don't hesitate to reach out, and I'll drop my email into the chat.
Great. Thank you so much to all of our panelists. And I think in the meantime, we'll turn to some of the audience questions that came in through the Q&A and chat. We'll also be able to welcome some of our attendees to come off mute once I'm able to prompt those. But I think we saw a question come in, I think during the beginning of Samantha, your presentation that opens up the floor to all the panelists. Tom, you posed it in the Q&A session about any potential additional co-benefits that I think cropped up in everybody's presentation, including reduced water use. Jordan, I think you mentioned for some crops, keeping farms in production by providing additional revenues to farmers through incentive programs. So I guess we'll welcome all the panelists to kind of take a stab at this, just talking through any of the co-benefits that you see to deploying agrivoltaics. And I guess I can just facilitate the Q&A rather than going through the trouble of unmuting folks. But yeah, over to you all. Jordan, I think I see you coming off.
Sure,
mute.
yeah, I'll take it. It's not an easy question, but I think you know, this, and there was another question that just came in the Q&A from Mike, are really getting at an important element, which is you know, many strategies for agrivoltaics seem to be almost driven you know, by the solar developer, with incentives sort of targeted to the solar developer, and oftentimes benefits accruing to the solar developer. And I think that you know, poses a real challenge if we do want to see greater deployment of agrivoltaics. I think, you know, there's more to be figured out with how do we really ensure that that farmers aren't losing you know, control over their land, or you know, and that they are going to be, you know, receiving benefits that they think are valuable. And I think it's one of the challenges that we're facing is that the solar infrastructure, you know, costs a lot. It has a very high capital cost, and the solar developers are really taking on that risk. And so it sort of follows that they're the ones that would be receiving many of those benefits and incentives. And so I think that is a key question, and something that we are interested in. I know the state of Colorado's Department of Agriculture has also, you know, recently initiated a series of grants for novel designs and research. That a key component is, how do we ensure that this is actually benefiting the farming community, actually benefiting the landowner, and again, not just the solar developer. And so, but I don't know, you know, I think certainly Grace and Samantha are going to have real insights, I think, from that agricultural perspective as well.
Yeah, so in Massachusetts, I'll say that, I'll be honest, we don't have the answer to this yet either. And I think at this point in time, we also are seeing it in most cases as the developer approaching the farmer and not the other way around. So I think, yeah, there's more work to be done to figure out how we can make sure that both parties are getting the most benefit possible. I think the way we try to address that now is by making sure that all parties are involved in the conversation from day one. So that collaboration with UMass that I mentioned, having MDAR go out in person and do site visits, and requiring, you know, documentation of that collaboration with all the parties from day one and on an ongoing basis, I hope, you know, provides some some safeguards there. And then we also have some kind of external third parties that serve almost like consultants in a way, that will work to kind of be a mediator between parties as well, and look out for the interests of the farmer and make sure that the project's being designed in a way that's going to benefit them. So that's not something that our agency has a lot of insight to, because it kind of happens behind the scenes. But I know that that's something that is going on as well.
Yeah, this is such a key question for us too, especially if benefits, financial benefits are going to be offered to developers. You need to make sure that as best as you can, you've got sort of metrics in place that will, as Grace has said before, yield a project that where both sides of the project are benefiting, so the solar developer and the farmer. I think this is where research is so important. Farmers are business people, and farms are businesses, and they're not necessarily going to go out on a limb unless they know something is going to be successful. And if you are entering into farming land that has some kind of constraint on it, like solar panels, that's a very different kind of production than what farmers are used to. And so making sure that there's research and demonstrations that show pretty clearly over time the impacts on yield, the impacts on revenue. I mean, like I said, sheep grazing and solar are pretty compatible. There's a financial benefit to the developer and a financial benefit to the farmer in terms of access to land, so long as the farmer's needs are taken into consideration, like fencing and access to water. And so that's why we've come up with the metrics that we have. They're kind of general, but you really do want to make sure that you're holding developers to account to develop a project that will support a viable farm operation for decades to come. And I think this is a innovation. It's a challenging question, how to advance this through policy. And every state is going to do it a little bit differently. But that's why we want the agency of the Agriculture Department to really be in the lead in collaboration with the Energy Agency.
Great. Hopefully that got to Tom and Michael, both of your questions. Switching gears a bit, I think we also had a question come in through the chat asking about major challenges or barriers related to permitting and zoning for agrivoltaic installations. And I imagine this definitely relates to the engagement between developers and the farmer and rancher community. So if you all had any insights, that certainly is a topic that's of relevance to all, clean energy deployment.
I think one challenge that we've seen with permitting and zoning is sort of agrivoltaics sort of straddles two different worlds. In one sense, it's an energy project, but then it's also an agricultural project. And so we've sort of seen a little bit of confusion or uncertainty about how it should be managed, and how it should be regulated. And so this has come up, I think, especially in terms of stormwater management, for a solar project, and concerns over what stormwater management practices, are required, how impervious is that surface, et cetera, and what sort of steps would the project need to take in order to do that. But overall, I would also say, agrivoltaics in a lot of ways can help alleviate some challenges that we're seeing for just traditional ground-mounted solar arrays. Oftentimes, if there's an agrivoltaic element, it can add sort of more favorable, points, if you will, to that project, if they are, demonstrating that they are going to be actively doing some agricultural activities. But I think, I think the we've probably seen the most development with agrivoltaic projects in terms of crops in Massachusetts. And so I think Grace might have some insights as well on challenges they've seen.
Yeah, so I just put in the chat the link to our guideline for agrivoltaic systems, which goes into a lot more detail on the eligibility criteria. In terms of actual permits and zoning, that's handled on the local level by municipalities. So our agency doesn't have any control over that. But in terms of being eligible for our incentive program, we list eligible farmland as being either currently enrolled in Chapter 61A, which addresses land and agricultural use, or falling under the important agricultural farmland definition. And we have like a mapping tool to show which lands are classified as important agricultural farmland, and that has a gradient as well, going from prime farmland, unique farmland, and land of statewide importance. So they can the land itself can come into eligibility through either of those criteria.
Yeah, and I guess a couple things I would add, obviously if you need to be raising panels higher and there are height restrictions, that's one thing that we certainly see. Setbacks obviously are a bone of contention or a question that come up. Obviously, as Grace said, though, these are local jurisdictional issues for the most part. And yeah, just since you're mentioning soils, Grace, we have seen some land use laws that sort of carve out restrictions on developing prime farmland for solar, for instance. Something that I didn't mention when we're talking about mitigation fees, we're talking about for all development, not just solar. I just wanted to make sure that that's clear. But I think one important thing to consider is if there is some kind of a fee for siting on a certain type of land, whether it's at the local level or at the state level, carving out for true agrivoltaic projects that stay in production, carving out an exemption from those fees is an important thing to consider. Kind of a little different from the question that you asked, but we see that in land use laws, so felt relevant to bring up.
Great. Thank you all so much for your input. And we are at the top of the hour. There was, I think, one more lingering question in the chat, but I'll encourage folks to jot down the contact emails and the contact information that our panelists dropped into the chat and reach out with any more specific or technical questions following this webinar. But thank you all, panelists, for this awesome information. Hopefully everybody who attended was able to glean some new insights to the potential and benefits of agrivoltaics. And thank you all for joining us. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.